Alright, let's do this. The Alchemy Department Hub. You know, it all started when I got to Site 127. I think the director had been around a lot longer than he let on. Excerpt debriefing. Arturno Genuma. The Department of Science Alchemy Division. The Alchemy Department, long-running joke of the Foundation. A department much maligned by the usual research staff. Very few people really understand just how much it does. Alchemy isn't poking around with chemicals and turning lead to gold. It can, but it's more than that. Alchemy is the manipulation of the etheric forces which generate reality around us. The men and women in the Alchemy Department are few and extraordinary. Led by Director Ruslav Diaghilev, they are tasked with containing threats beyond rational science, in places most Foundation's personnel can only dream of. They do so without thanks or respect from the majority of the Foundation. If you ever encounter something so fantastic you just can't explain it, you just need to consult an alchemist. Alright, and as I said earlier, I shall be doing the Great Seal series, starting with Finding Balance. Finding balance. And thus the aethers shall be in balance. The five aethers are the foundation of practical alchemy, and must always be respected. Some call them elements, other eidolons, and other more esoteric names. The aethers, however, are the pure elemental forces of the universe. Air, earth, fire, water, electricity. Aronis, Turonis, Ignis, Aquis, and Fulminus. Respect the aethers, and they will serve well. Excerpt Practical Alchemy by R. Diaghilev. Ruslav Diaghilev woke to the sound of the cosmos rushing in his ears. That and the liquid clock that was gifted to him for his birthday last year. He blinked the blurry sleep from his eyes and sat up into the cold autumn morning. The first inklings of light were slipping through the windows. As he swung his feet out and across and over the edge of the bed, across the room, faintly glowing liquids burbled happily in their decanters. Soft orange and blue light emanated from several tubes, rushing around the apparatus with merry abandon. He rose with a grunt, shuffling towards the lavatory at the other end of the room, or reaching out to touch the series activation stubs on the wall for the muted amber overhead lighting. He smiled. As the orb slowly winked to life, the deep amber light turned the room from shadows to a world of deepest base belief. Of deepest bas relief. As the light spread across the workbench, the familiar sights of numerous notebooks, fragments of recipes and formulas appeared before him. His chalkboard, covered in heavy, angular script, shone with the faint sheen of recently erased chalk. Reaching out with one tired hand, Roslov turned the activation knob for the burner underneath the faintly glowing blue liquid, causing it to bubble higher and the overflow to slowly drip into the brown liquid in the largest decanter. He agitated the mixture with a glass rod, while chanting quietly in a language that few knew and fewer still dared to utter. As he chanted, the mixture turned from a dark brown to a light brown, with a golden sheen, smiled, and turned the knob, allowing some of the liquid to flow into an earthenware jug. He raised the vessel to lip. He raised the vessel to his lips, and a smile spread across his face as the liquid passed through his mouth and down into his stomach. I've finally done it. Counteracted the erroneous aether. Finally, it tastes just like coffee. He felt the fatigue and discomfort of waking so early wash away as the filter took its effect. Roslav Diaghilev, alchemist of the Seventh Circle, looking out his windows across the snow-laden sea from his cabin. He nodded, taking another sip of the mixture before replacing the jug on the table. I need to keep this handy right here. Alchemy, like any other science, has laws, rules. These laws and rules may bend from time to time, but they are as indelible as physics. While the physical sciences may be more practically applicable, the simple need for the containment of alchemic anomalies requires special attention to the alchemic arts. Excerpt The Sealing Way. M.R. Tissot. First historical mention of anomalies. Hours later, R. Man, it's gonna be a while before I can get his name right. Diaghilev, as his name tag so helpfully proclaimed him, sat hunched in his car on the line to get into Site 79. The snow had started to fall faster now, and Roslov sighed in frustration. The snow always caught in the hem of his robes. The line to get into the site was unusually long due to the weather, and his heater wasn't as strong as it used to be. A few minutes passed, and Ruslan came to the front of the line and presented his credentials to the security personnel at the gate. He pulled up, looked the man in the eye, and caught the hint of a smirk on his face. The guard took the card and scanned it before handing it back. "Thank you. Please proceed." Roslov suppressed a sigh at the grin on the security guard's face. He was well used to the stares and the questionable deference he had from his colleagues. He pulled into his parking spot and got out of his car, cursing under his breath as the snow on the floor of the parking structure. He brushed the small spot away and counted his steps before reaching 88, then recited a quiet formula. A junior researcher stared at him as he did, nearly breaking his concentration. The researcher may not have thought much of Roslov's robes, but the snow never quite reached them until his recitation. He smiled to himself and said thanks to the erroneous aether for its assistance. He walked through the halls, and the quiet swish of his robes, at odds with the hard clack of the researcher's shoes, and the quiet click of high heels. His own shoes were made of rubber, properly made and accordance with ancient formulas many years ago. They were bright purple, and the shoes themselves were poorly stitched. But he was an alchemist, not a cobbler. They were warm, waterproof, silent, and earned him the nickname Grapefoot from his college companions. He settled into his office with a quiet sigh and pulled his phone out of the recesses of his robes, plugging it into his computer to charge. He muttered a thank you to the Fulminous Aether and a curse to Apple for a short battery life. The office was functional, covered in few workbenches, one of which contained a simple decanter reduction system. The only other door in the office led to the lab, connected to his colleague's office as well. The drab concrete walls fit Ruslav's personality perfectly. He smiled at the calendar beside his desk. There were cats on it. Ruslav settled into his workstation to go over morning emails. There is always some bureaucratic nonsense to deal with at the Foundation. And so it has come to us, the wise, to protect the world. The Foundation's best chance to seal off the influence of the entities for all time. As such, I propose that we take action once and for all, create the Great Seal, and for all time prevent such incursions into our reality. Excerpt: A Call to Action. R. Diagolith. As the 12th hour of the day arrived, Roslav's stomach rumbled with hunger, and he put down the report on a filter of molasses, which some famous American had used to attain immortality. He left a few final scribbles on his notes for now, and stood up, stretched his broad shoulders with a yawn. He started his way towards the cafeteria with slowly creeping fatigue. The filter from this morning had to be wearing off. He hoped quietly to himself that he had made enough to last a few weeks at least. That particular convergence wasn't likely to happen again for a very long time. As he walked along, he spotted Dr. Collins walking towards the cafeteria and waved slightly. The doctor looked over and smiled, waiting for Ruslav to catch up before they walked in tandem towards the cafeteria. "It's good to see you, Ruslav. Have a good weekend?" Ruslav nodded and smiled at Dr. Collins. "Yes, my filter finally came into proper solution this morning. I was very happy to say that worked without any difficulty." Ruslav took a left turn towards the cafeteria. The sound of conversation filled the off-white hallways. They filled a small crowd on the escalator up to level 3. They joined a small crowd on the escalator up to level 3 to the cafeteria. It opened out into the expansive and beautiful decorated cafeteria level. They had remodeled recently. The dark green looked out over fields of snow-covered grass. The dark tile of the floor completed the somber burgundy of the walls. All colors Reznov found pleasing. Dr. Reznov smiled at Ruslav, or Dr. Collins smiled at Ruslav as they walked towards the serving area. "Congratulations, Ruslav. I had hoped it would happen soon. Is this the same super coffee you were discussing before?" Dr. Collins got into the line from the hot buffet and grabbed a tray, loading up a couple of plates with his usual starchy fare. He had gained a few pounds recently, stress eating due to a recent project. Roslov grabbed his own tray, loading it with a mix of vegetables, a light salad, and a large piece of some pink fish, pretending to be a salmon. Yes, I was happy to say it worked perfectly. This morning was significantly easier. He grabbed a small tray of cookies, his one indulgence, and headed to the top of the line. Dr. Collins flashed his idea to pay for this lunch, and Roslov did the same. The two headed for an empty table nearby. Several other researchers waved to Dr. Collins, and the two sat down, digging into lunch with abandon. The other tables were rapidly filling up, but Roslov and Dr. Collins had one of the smaller round tables to themselves. His dark brown robe stood out from the white-coated researchers, but they did every day. They made small talk for a few minutes before a young researcher stepped up to the table looking eager and bright-eyed. Dr. Collins, I was hoping I could ask you a few questions about the new research topic you suggested last week. Dr. Collins looked up and quickly swallowed the bite he was chewing through. Of course, Daniel. This is Roslov Diaghilev, one of the members of the Alchemy Division. Roslov looked up to meet the eyes of the young man, displaying the usual mix of confusion and surprise. How do you do, young man? Roslov held out one large hand, shaking the young man's hand firmly. Good. It's nice to meet you, Dr. Diaghilev. Daniel said a little too fast, not particularly covering up his confusion very well. I am not a doctor, but I understand the confusion. Mr., or if you're being very formal, Elder is the appropriate title. He tried to hide the grimace that has the usual look of incredulity passed over the young man's features. Dr. Collins looked over at Roslov and crooked his head. If I heard right, you guys were getting a new hire today. Unless Jameson was talking out of his ass again. He scooped up his last bite of pasta and leaned back. Roslov's eyebrows raised. The deep line on his face creased. You hire? I wasn't aware of you getting new apprentices anymore. And I hadn't realized anyone could ever feel the currents anymore, he thought to himself. I'll have to consult my colleagues. Dr. Collins rose, escorted Daniel away. Till next time, Roslov, enjoy your studies. And so, our alchemy division shall henceforth be tasked with the sealing and secrecy of initiation. Initiative redacted. All knowledge of alchemy shall be discredited. All maintenance of the seals, circles, and other alchemic devices shall be entrusted to R. Diaghilev and M. Adiobio, Directors of the Alchemy Division. Excerpt 05 Council Plan of Action Number redacted. The quiet walk back to his office was uneventful. Upon reaching his door, he heard a quiet tinkling, a soft sound like water upon a starlit lake. He closed his eyes, growing lost in the sound. The aqueous aether speaking to him in the deepest language the universe offered. It was soon a convergence. He would be able to access both the aqueous and the Euronus. It was finally time to begin the next step in his process. He hurried to the lab, where his only colleague, Elder Adiobio, stood, his coal black skin a stark contrast to the, if you are honest with it, tacky milk-white robes he wore at all times. The walls of the lab were unlike any other room in the site. From top to bottom, it had been inscribed with copper chisels, formula of containment, order, and protection. Roslov and that Adebayo had prepared the room over 16 painstaking months, using using various convergence events and storing aether where necessary. This room was the alchemic equivalent of a bomb shelter, and the only place they dared to work any significant research. The walls were lined with tables containing several decanter reduction systems, wind flow apparatus, a few burners, and even a fine earthen separator. Mounted on one wall was a solid wooden holder, which contained two heavy croziers, one of brass and wood, belonged to Adebayo, the other of cold iron and lead belonged to Ruslav. Across from the crozier was a set of three concentric circles set in the floor. The last was polished, inscribed copper. The second was cold iron. The last was the finest and most delicate gold. The materials for the last circle had been transmuted from pure aether to common lead, then gold. You felt it too, Roslav? The rich syllables of the third language flowed from his lips, his mellifluous accent blending perfectly with the interplay of light and dark in the phenomenon. Phonemes. His hand spread out over the wind flow, measuring and pinwheels on his desk. He felt the swirling currents as he hurried to the equipment along the wall. He adjusted several knobs, and the liquids began to bubble, already taking on a soft glow. Of course I felt it. Where were you in the harness of the Aronis? Where are you in the harness of the Aronis? Adebayo's specialty lay in the Aronis aether, and Slorzlov would be significantly more comfortable in the aqueous. Adebayo's hands spread silently as he switched to the second language, approaching the beginning of the true language quickly. I am almost there. Could you bring me the circle of Veronis binding? Roslov nodded and picked up a copper circlet, inscribed with various symbols occult organizations had scribed from ancient alchemists in centuries past. We're going to renew the 13th seal this time, yes? Roslov placed the circlet on Adebayo's head, crowning his shaved scalp. Yes, the creature made a noise a few months ago, and we need to make sure it's held. The seal is almost in the fullest of its shape. With this, we can... A sudden crack of aether spread across the lab, disrupting the energy shaped by the words of the second language. The fullest aether surged quickly, pushing back against the ritual motions and words. From the currents of the unseen, a laughing sound could be heard. Accompanying the electrical energy of the fullest aether was an empty feeling, the feeling of chaining and binding, of energies reflected and amplified. Roslov knew this feeling well. The laughter echoed in the paths of his memory. As his eyebrows narrowed, his teeth started to snarl. The Scarlet King was buckling his steel, and attempting to push back against Roslav and Adebayo. Roslov's hands blurred as he drew the symbolic circlet from the space under his lab desk and tossed it into the air. His hands spread as he began to chant in the first language, one step removed from the true language. The circlet stayed suspended in the air for a moment before bouncing and landing on its side, slowly spinning around on its side. Adebayo's head burst into sweat as the aethers compressed. They are pushing back. I do not know how long his words were strained now. The second language's power being stretched to their limits. Roslav's voice rang out like thunder. and he pulled his hands to his side, his fist clenched. You will not disrupt our work today. I shall push you back to whence you are. Begone, Scarlet King. With a sudden crack of thunder, the building energies flowed into the encircling, grounding harmlessly into the hand-forged iron. The laughter turned into a snarling sound of pain as the chains around the entity went taut again, pulling it tight. All went quiet, except for Elder Adebayo's chanting. Several minutes passed as Ruslav's breath came back to him. The effort required to banish the fullness aether gathered by the Scarlet King to push against the ritual had been staggering. But he forced it into the circle at last. The entities contained within the ring of purified metal, shaped by hand with the right rituals. Nothing could break it in the aether. Only a mortal hand could undo the energies stored there now, and even then, they would need to be significantly gifted in the art. Roslav struggled over to the lab desk and put his hands to work on the aqueous harness for the ritual. The waters and the filters bubbled, and he spoke quietly in the second language, his words blending with Adebayo's and forming a harmonious chorus. The energies of the aether poured into the small vessel of purified water, creating truly elemental water. He held it gingerly between two fingers and brought it to Adebayo's station. Elemental water. This will reinforce the seal perfectly. Did you get yours? He held up a small pinwheel, brightly colored like a child's toy. The ultra-fine inscriptions on the blades were near invisible to the naked eye. It spun slowly with small air currents flowing around it. Of course, Elder. I will perform the ritual tonight. Our colleagues in Vena and Casa Verde should have the fire and earth required. A quiet knock on the door drew both their attentions to the small crowd of onlookers. Several of them had hands over their mouths, trying not to laugh. Roslav's heart dropped. They couldn't feel a single thing of what just happened. To them it was two old men screaming at nothing, and pantomiming. What? He growled, his hands shaking with exhaustion and his mind filled with annoyance. Your, new hires here. Mike sent me to get you, Mr. Diaghilev. Roslav narrowed his eyes. It was the young man from lunch, Daniel. He sighed heavily. Of course, thank you. He shuffled off silently, his shoes completely silent. The last thing he heard was Daniel's voice under the breath. What's up with the purple shoes? Why do we keep these people around? I know we're all about the anomalies, but there's no way these guys are for real. They're just wasting Foundation resources. The amount of money spent on raw copper is absurd. Excerpt email from site director redacted. The rumors were true then. Roslav turned and headed towards the front gate, noted at the various doctors, security staff, and administrative staff he passed. Most of them didn't even give him odd looks anymore. A few flights of stairs, which are getting harder, and muttered thanks to the aethers at the correct times, brought him to the front desk, where a nervous-looking young man stood in the lobby side, along with Mike. Mike was giving him an odd look, with a hand on his hip, near to his baton. The reception area looked fairly plain. There's a desk behind with Mike sat, and a row of chairs along two walls, which visitors were seated in. The drab taupe walls stood out slightly. The drab taupe walls stood out slightly from the off-brown carpet along the floor. Two men looked at Mike and the young man with careful attention, interested in what was taking place before them. The magazines they'd been reading were tossed back on the table between the two sets of chairs. The reading room always reminded Roslav of a doctor's office waiting area. I'm telling you, son, I can't let you bring unapproved weapons into the site. His eyes were locked on the glass and silver crozier in his hands, the twin snakes of Asclepius. Roslav smiled as his eyes hesitated for a moment over the young man's robes, of royal blue, unpretentious, functional, and yet tastefully traditional. Perhaps there is hope yet? He held a hand up to Mike. It's not a weapon, Mike. It's a crozier. Alchemist tools. He's all right. Mike looked over at Roslav and nodded for a moment. He sat back down at the office chair in front of the monitors. Young man couldn't see, but the two waiting patrons relaxed as well. MTF members took threats and potential threats very seriously. I am Roslav Diaghilev, alchemist of the... Roslav started, his voice tired and heavy, expecting very little of the young man in front of him. Seventh Circle, yes, sir. I was recommended to study under you by Alan Barnd of the Fifth Circle. He said you were the best and one of the last practical appliers of the art. The clear Barcelona accent on his English lips lisped a few of his S's, but he was reasonably understandable. Roslav narrowed his eyes and switched to a form of Proto-Etruscan, the eighth language, closer to the true language, but still distant enough to be for conversation. And how trained are you, young man? Do you know the vagaries of the art? Have you been initiated? The young man hesitated, and his head drooped slightly. He attempted to speak as well. I am to be not practiced in the art as one such as you may be. He attempted to pronounce the name of the language poorly. It's not very good. I'm sorry. Roslav smiled and nodded, switching back to English. You are more than a dabbler, young man. What is your name? Arturo Genumo, sir, he said with a deep bow, which shook the backpack slightly on his frame. Roslav's face split into one of the first genuine smiles of the day as he took notice of the equipment in his pack, which marked him as a student of the Aqueous Aether. Welcome to the site, Artio. Please walk with me. He turned and silently walked off. Artio's odd purple shoes were an exact match for his own. As I've told you, They're not frauds. I've witnessed what they can do firsthand, and the O5 Council says they're necessary. You've seen the budget allotments for the Alchemist Division, and it's not like we haven't encountered alchemic SCP objects. Just give them the chance, Jim. Excerpt email from Dr. Collins, and response to site director redacted. And that was the first tale for tonight. Or for this afternoon, I should say.